Emilio has to be very careful about is the threat of a Groudon and a Venusaur lead from Santino. And, you know, you have to worry, will one of my Pokemon be put to sleep? Will one of my Pokemon just be outsped and knocked out? You know, the thing about Calyrex Shadow Rider is, yes, it's very fast, but it's still going to be slower than a Venusaur in the sun thanks to that chlorophyll ability. So it looks like these trainers are ready to go. This is game 1 of top 8 here in New Jersey, and I am so excited to see how this is going to play out.
I am also. The action is going to be incredibly intense here as we kick off this very first game. We'll see Santino lead with that Groudon and that Venusaur, so already going to get the sun up and on the board. And for Emilio, we've got the Shadow Rider Calyrex and, of course, that Thundurus.
So this is a great lead from both these trainers because I think they immediately sort of force each other's hands. So on Emilio's side of the field, he has that Thundurus, can go for Dynamax, can start hitting max airstreams into that Venusaur so that the Calyrex Shadow Rider will outspeed despite the fact that the sun is on the field, at which point Calyrex can knock out that Venusaur. Honestly, this lead sort of forces Santino to either, you know, commit to the Sleep Powder strategy, target down that Thundurus, or switch the Venusaur out, try to keep it safe, and take a ton of damage as a result.
Well, we're seeing a switch from Emilio to kick things off, so that Shadow Rider Calyrex just going to swap for the Incineroar, and now that's going to be great to be able to drop the Groudon's attack, but Santino not missing a beat here, gonna kick things off with a Dynamax, and I've gotta guess that that's gonna be that, okay, I was gonna say the Venusaur, but the Groudon makes way more sense when you've got that Thundurus across the field.
Exactly. The great thing about Dynamaxing Groudon early on in the game, especially if it's one of those bulkier variants like we saw yesterday, it will be able to sit on the field for several turns. It will get the defense boost up early on a turn where, quite frankly, there's no damage to be seen from Emilio.
Yeah, well, the Venusaur also, without the Dynamax, is able to go for those Sleep Powders. Unfortunately, it goes into the Protect from the Thundurus, but the Max Quake into the Incineroar, that's definitely going to hurt.
There was no Shucca Berry activation either on that, and that is something that I think is worth noting as we saw this Incineroar switch in and possibly try and take a Sleep Powder or something from this Venusaur. You know, I think that Santino targeted down the Thundurus because he was expecting a Dynamax kind of like I was. But if this Incineroar is able to maybe not go to sleep, maybe it's holding safety goggles, which was more popular.
That's possible, but also think about the fact that Incineroar did drop the Groudon's attack and it was able to survive. And that could be critical. Now Incineroar being switched in, it's in its first turn, but it's just going to switch back out, and here it comes back out, that Calyrex Shadow Rider. And let's see what's going to happen with that Groudon. But honestly, this is pretty big for Emilio to just kind of start to withstand some of these Groudon Dynamaxes. And we're seeing a Dynamax on Emilio's side now. That Thundurus is ready to go.
Ready to go, possibly feeling comfortable that it doesn't have to worry about being put to sleep by that Sleep Powder now. But, you know, I think Emilio just playing very smart. We saw how much damage that Groudon did. One of the easiest ways to guarantee you get a second Intimidate is just switching it out and hope that you don't take any damage on that switch.
Maybe not seeing any damage. That Venusaur is going to Protect, so Thundurus gets to go for a free Max Airstream. Look at how much damage that does. Half through the Protect. That is a lot, but more importantly, you're increasing the speed of both the Thundurus and the Shadow Rider Calyrex. But wow, Santino going right away for the Max Strike to be able to reduce the speeds and neutralize it once again. That's huge.
But that's could be a Defiant Thundurus. Yes. Yep. So even though the Groudon is able to keep the speeds relatively even on the field, that Calyrex, yes, it will be slower than the Venusaur this turn, but Thundurus is going to deal so much damage with this next attack.
That's if it gets the attack off.
If it does get the attack off. Again, Santino in a position where I think he's forced to rely on Sleep Powder, and the fact that Emilio is, again, sort of forcing Santino to follow that through with the Venusaur, it's a pretty good strat if you're counting on those Sleep Powders missing. If Sleep Powder connects with the Thundurus at this point in time, that would be absolutely devastating. But instead, choosing to put that Calyrex Shadow Rider to sleep.
Yeah, that's going to be Calyrex Shadow Rider taking a nap. So it's not going to be able to move this turn, but Thundurus going for a max airstream. That Venusaur is definitely out of here, and we do have a speed boost this time around. That critical hit's definitely not going to matter based on the damage that we saw through the protect.
Oh, yeah. It's likely that this Groudon...
out of the way for now, but Groudon does get a chance to fire back. Now that the Venusaur is off the field, who cares if you reset the weather now? Max Rockfall going right into the Thunderous, and oh my gosh, it survives on 3 HP. But at least the Sandstorm chip will be able to knock it out.
Good information for Santino for game 2. After a single Intimidate, you're probably going to want, at least one hit on that Thunderous before you go for an attack. But really great, I think, to note that the combination of Max Strike plus a Max Rockfall was the combo that picked up that knockout, similar to how we saw Kyogre's being played now with Hyper Beam for Max Strike. This Groudon following a very similar strategy. It's a good form of speed control. Depending on what attack it's based off of, it could also be pretty powerful as well. We've seen this Groudon, again, do so much damage to that Incineroar through the Intimidate with that Max Quake. It's likely that this Groudon does have some attack investment here, and that's exactly what Santino's going to have to capitalize on. He got this Grimmsnarl out on the field, which is an interesting choice. Grimmsnarl tends to be a Pokemon that many trainers like to lead with, so that they're able to set up those light screens or those reflects early. But given that we know there is a speed boost already on the field for that Calyrex, it already has had its mandatory turn of sleep. It's possible that Santino, just looking to get maybe some speed control down on the field somehow, could be a Scary Face again, could be a Thunder Wave into that Zacian, and just give this Groudon a little bit more room to start dealing more consistent damage. Could opt to switch it out for his own Incineroar here, but looks like Groudon's going to stay in, and things are getting quite tricky.
Yeah, Calyrex is going to tame the Iron Ball there and took the Focus Sash to potentially live this Behemoth Blade, but it goes into the Groudon instead. But that would have been an absolutely massive brain attack if that had worked that way. But Shadow Rider Calyrex stays asleep. So we are going to see a beautiful knockout onto the Zacian. It is going to be a critical hit. And Precipice Blades damages well onto the Shadow Rider Calyrex.
Calyrex within range of knockout from a second Precipice Blades. It was cool seeing that trick for the Focus Sash. Maybe if Sandstorm isn't up on the field, that's something that Santino could do as well in a future matchup. But for now, Incineroar finally forced back out on the field, but at such low health, it's possible that all Santino has to do this turn is just wait a turn. I mean, Sandstorm's still going to be active for 3 more turns. It's likely the Calyrex will stay asleep 1 more turn at this point. I think it's about a coin flip if it wakes up or not. But regardless, if Grimmsnarl has any attack here, you use it to attack the Calyrex and then let Sandstorm do the rest.
Oh, Calyrex is going to stay asleep, even though the Fake Out does go into the Groudon. Making sure it can't attack, but the foul play will secure the knockout onto the Shadow Rider Calyrex, and Emilio down to just the Incineroar left. And that's confirmation that that's safety goggles. It didn't take any damage from the Sandstorm.
All right, well, there it is. Good information to know, and really coming in the nick of time, as it's the last turn. Emilio will forfeit, understandably so. I think at this point, you're giving up information about your own Incineroar, but I mean, realistically, you're just going to click Flare Blitz, and if you do get the attack, your recoil is going to knock you out anyway. So very well played game from Santino. I really liked how he used the Venusaur in this matchup to apply pretty consistent pressure. I mean, it was on the field for 3 turns. It was able to go for Sleep Powder exactly when he needed it. And really, even that turn when the Venusaur used Protect, it just felt like the threat of Sleep Powder that turn was enough to sort of force Emilio to focus in on that Venusaur with the max airstream and give Groudon the opportunity to go on the offense.
Well, I think the other thing that is really great about the way that Santino played that game is I think a lot of trainers get so afraid of a Thunderous Defiant boost that they don't use the moves that could be more beneficial to the team overall. So you could see that Santino was very much prioritizing the speed drop and just the damage from the max strike versus the threat of that Defiant boost, because Thunderous just ended up knocking out the Venusaur that would have been knocked out anyway, whether that Defiant boost was active or not.
Exactly, and that was a very good call there. I think the one thing that I want to see from Emilio in terms of adjustments in this matchup is, quite frankly, maybe don't go for the Airstream right away. I don't think you need to, whereas if you go for a Max Lightning and get the Electric Terrain set up, then all of a sudden Venusaur can only sleep powder the Thundurus on your team. And I feel like that would have given him a bit more opportunity to deal damage with that Calyrex Shadow Rider. You know, especially with the chip damage that was on the field at that point in time, there could have been some nice boosts for it in the special attack and just, you know, some momentum gained that way.
Well, definitely switching things up here. Emilio, at least, is going to be bringing that Incineroar nice and early to this game number 2. Santino leading with the same leads as game number 1, that Venusaur and that Groudon. Good synergistic combo.
Fake Out plus Airstream will pick up the knockout on Venusaur if it doesn't protect. But, you know, the key question here is, will Santino go for a protect plus a Dynamax play, or will he try to do something else? We saw Max Quake almost pick up the knockout on that Incineroar despite the Intimidate, and we saw that Max Rockfall do so much damage as well. It's possible that Santino could just protect the Venusaur here, go for another Max Quake, and then next turn rely on the Sand to pick up the knockout. Oh wait, but it can't because safety goggles. But still, you know, there is so many options here for Santino. I think Emilio, though, is forced to focus in on this Venusaur so that Sleep Powder doesn't catch him off guard.
Well, Emilio's going to go right away for the Dynamax Thundurus. And now Santino, this is where I think things get a little interesting because he's also Dynamaxing. And based on the speeds, I'm gonna imagine this time I'm right about the Groudon.
Yeah. Unless something got real tricky in between games.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the Groudon now Dynamax for Santino as well, and so it really does come down to what this Incineroar is gonna do. But Venusaur just protecting. So is there gonna be a fake out? There is a fake out. It goes into the Venusaur's protect, and now Thundurus goes for the Max Airstream. Just gonna go for the Max Airstream into the Venusaur. We saw this do about half. It's gonna do the exact same, but Groudon still gets a chance to attack.
And Venusaur gets the opportunity to try and Sleep Powder again next turn. You know, Emilio very forced to just keep that threat under check, and Santino again comfortable going for the speed drop.
Yeah, that's pretty big. Maybe just comfortable knowing the calc between what Thundurus' damage can do to his own Groudon. That's a possibility, because maybe that Defiant Boost doesn't matter in order to have that Groudon survive, and Venusaur is going to get knocked out anyway.
I think so. I think at the end of the day, your Groudon's at full health. You know, it is in the Dynamax form, which means it has the extra boost that provides it. And given that this will give you the opportunity to outspeed this Thundurus for one more turn, you just take that risk and hope that when it's time, Max Rockfall is enough to make this a little bit easier, but the Sleep Powder missing this time around.
Yeah, that Max Airstream is going to secure the knockout once again onto the Venusaur, but that Sleep Powder miss was pretty detrimental. Now, Shadow Rider Calyrex does get that speed boost, but the fastest thing on the field is off the table. But Groudon going for a Max Quake into that Shadow Rider Calyrex slot, which was the Incineroar. Calyrex still takes a lot of damage.
It does, but it should be able to start using Astral Barrage starting this next turn. I think that if Santino brought the same Pokemon he brought to the previous game, this is probably when Grimmsnarl makes an appearance again. Though, one thing I can't help but wonder, you know, we saw the trick of the Iron Ball into the Calyrex previously. I wonder, if you're very worried about this Thundurus, you could trick the Iron Ball into the Thundurus, and then all of a sudden you can start hitting it with your ground-type moves, and you don't necessarily have to worry about the fact that your Max Rockfall will miss out on the knockout still this turn. It's a bit of a gamble. You know, I still think that both these Pokemon are equal threats, but to Santino's benefit, Groudon's still at full health, and realistically, he's going to need 2 attacks in order to pick up a knockout on it.
Well, Thundurus got the Iron Ball. Grimmsnarl gets the Life Orb. Calyrex uses Will-O-Wisp, burns the Groudon, and all of a sudden, that's not going to be enough damage whatsoever. And so, oh no, Grimmsnarl just gets one hit knocked out here from that Thundurus. That Defiant Boost proving to be pretty helpful to Emilio's game plan for this game number 2. And one can only hope that this Max Quake is going to be enough to be able to survive the damage coming in from the Calyrex, but it's not even going to matter because at least that knockout will come through.
So the interesting thing about Iron Ball is that it's not applied until the next turn. So now we did see Groudon move second. Now Groudon should move first. and I believe Dynamax should be up as well. So even though Groudon is intimidated and burned and has no hope of switching out to drop one of those, he will get the opportunity to hit both these Pokemon for super effective damage, and made a switch up of his own, leaving the Incineroar behind and bringing his own Calyrex Shadow Rider to this match, which I feel like is going to open things up as well. You know, one thing I was worried about with the Incineroar coming in this turn would be another Defiant activation, which would make this Thundurus really, really scary as opposed to just, you know, scary. But knowing that he has Calyrex Shadow Rider and knowing that Thundurus has its speed halved even after those airstreams should allow Santino to get one hit in before it attacks, and hopefully Groudon is bulky enough to take a couple of hits of its own so it can fire back. If Santino can find a knockout on either of these two Pokemon, you know, I think that he's easily going to find a win, but Emilio sacrificing the Defiant boosts and the speed boost to get a second Intimidate down on the field for that Groudon. That is just how big of a threat this Groudon is in this matchup, even when it's burned and intimidated.
Yeah, twice now.
Twice now.
So Zacian uses Behemoth Blade, a nice protect coming in from Santino to be able to block that damage. But the Precipice Blades will connect onto both the Zacian and the Incineroar, but look at how little damage that's able to do to both of these Pokemon that take super effective damage from that.
Really could just be fishing for a critical hit at this point as well, though it's worth noting that the burn would still have the damage of the critical hit, so it wouldn't be as powerful as one would expect. But this Incineroar doesn't have the Shucka Berry, will probably get knocked out if he does happen to roll a crit. Alternatively, any chip damage you can get on this Zacian puts it closer to the range where an Astral Barrage will pick up the knockout. It's possible that Santino could also be running Will-O-Wisp of his own, and that now would be a great time to try and connect that with that Zacian, or possibly a Thundurus on the switch, but it's actually going to be Substitute that its last move.
Yeah, Substitute gonna be used. Zacian going for Behemoth Blade, goes right into the sub that Calyrex just put down. And the Substitute is going to fade, but Groudon gonna go for another Precipice Blades here. So it is going to be able to start mitigating a lot of that damage coming through, but the Throat Chop right into the Shadow Rider Calyrex. That's a big reveal from Emilio's Incineroar to be able to take out that threat, and that's it. This Groudon may not be able to get the damage through that it needs to, but it does have the special defense boost. Maybe that's going to be impactful for the Thundurus in the back, except the fact that it's physical, so don't listen to me. But yeah, the way that Emilio has been able to play around this Groudon, be able to stunt a lot of the damage output, that's huge.
So this is an interesting switch here, and I think this just goes to show you how experienced that Emilio is. Sending in this Thundurus does happen to dodge the Precipice Blades, which makes this turn a little bit easier, of course, but you know, just making sure that the Groudon is intimidated and its attack is so low that, again, barring a critical hit, this Zacian should be able to use however many Behemoth Blades it needs to pick up that knockout. So just keeping that win condition in mind. Could also start going for a Fly on the Thundurus as well, just to slow things down a lot, you know, take his time and maybe address the field and address sort of what he thinks Santino's adaptations are going to be. But another piece of information, the Zacian running Substitute most likely does not have 3 attacks, and another Precipice Blades miss is just going to make this that much harder.
I kind of wonder whether the Precipice Blades damage would even be enough to break the Substitute either at this point.
I don't know. I mean, that's certainly something that Santino should play out for at this point. I think that knowing that and seeing how easily Emilio was able to land that burn and get those Incineroar switch-ins would be very helpful here. And, you know, every piece of information counts when you're in top 8, when you're going to a game 3, and it seems like these trainers were just so close. But another good piece of information, you know, Groudon will take 2 Behemoth Blades for a knockout. And I think we're going to see if this Substitute will break. I don't think it did. It did not.
Nope. Thunder's going to go for a Fly into the Groudon to be able to get the knockout. And Emilio ties up the series now, 1-1 versus Santino.
Great adjustments from Emilio. We saw him focus in on that Groudon, recognizing that the way Santino was playing in game 1, that Groudon was really central to his strategy. Even with the Shadow Rider Calyrex adjustment from Santino, you know, it just wasn't able to find the damage. Could have gone for an attack one turn, but instead I think tried to predict that Emilio would have maybe swapped in or swapped out that Incineroar again in order to get a second or third Intimidate down at that point in time. Tried to go for the substitute, unfortunately got called out on it, and as a result lost that Shadow Rider Calyrex. I don't think that was necessarily a bad adaptation though from Santino. Like, I think if I were Emilio, I would probably anticipate my opponent, you know, leaving that Incineroar behind again, bringing the same 4 Pokemon that I saw in game 2, but possibly trying to just go on the offensive with that Shadow Rider Calyrex instead of trying to say, okay, I'm going to predict a more passive turn from you. I'm going to try and set up a substitute. On Santino's side of the field, I still love the Venusaur play. I think that it's such a threatening Pokemon with those sleep powders and with the chlorophyll speed that you really have to bring it and you have to force your opponent to respect it. But if Santino's feeling confident about, you know, just how these matches have been played out, he could decide to leave the Venusaur behind for a Pokemon like the Charizard. And I think that would also have a very interesting matchup against Emilio's leads, especially if we see that Thundurus once again, you know, getting that residual damage down on the board, plus the fact that G-Max Wildfire and the Sun is probably one of the most powerful moves in the game, I think would just tear through that Thundurus and possibly even give Groudon the opportunity to just go for, you know, a couple of Precipice Blades and not worry if it gets intimidated and burned right off the bat, because you're not relying on it for your Dynamax damage.
I think the only thing I would say Charizard might have an issue with is just the overall speed of Emilio's team. Unfortunately, Charizard is not the bulkiest Pokemon, and so when you have a Zacian, when you have the Calyrex Shadow Rider, and even the Thundurus on some level, that could be difficult to have the Charizard to survive to get that damage off.
True, but you know, that would be a game 3 style adjustment. Whether or not Santino calls it and whether or not Emilio makes a couple changes of his own, we'll have to see as these trainers getting started. Winner of this match moving on to top 4 in one of the most difficult regional championships we've had so far.
Well, Santino's not switching anything up. We've got the Groudon and the Venusaur. Was able to work out in game number 1. Let's see if Santino can take that duo through this game 3 as well. And Emilio liked the game 2 plan. So Thundurus and Incineroar on the field.
I don't think there's anything that necessarily is bad about going for a fake out plus an airstream here if you're Emilio, because if Venusaur doesn't protect, you just knock it out. It doesn't get the sleep powder. If Venusaur does protect, though, you still get the speed boost. And if that's something that Santino is worried about, you're also giving yourself a Defiant boost as well. You know, we've seen this Groudon 2 games in a row go for a max strike against this Thundurus, specifically because it was relying on max airstream. And if we see Santino go for that again, you know, this Thundurus will be more than happy to take advantage of that. But no fake out, instead an adjustment. It looks like we're going to be seeing Rillaboom and grassy terrain, which also pretty scary if you're Groudon.
That is definitely scary. The Rillaboom going to be able to set that up, but it's going to be the Thundurus that Dynamax is once again for Emilio. And so having the max airstream active, haven't seen a whole lot of the other options from this Thundurus quite yet, but can only imagine that with the physical Thundurus, you have something like that max lightning available. Not going to be too impactful into the Pokemon that are on Santino's side, but we also have a Dynamax here as well from Santino.
If Rillaboom swapped in to take a Max Quake from this Groudon, that could be huge. Rillaboom also really threatens Groudon. You know, I think a lot of us old school players assume that it's still a fire-type Pokemon. It's not. Those Grassy Glides are going to be hitting for super effective damage, and Venusaur going for a Protect once again. Did Emilio call this?
Yeah, the Max Airstream going right into the Venusaur. And Incineroar was really just there to pressure the fake out at this point. And Santino couldn't really risk not getting anything done with the Venusaur. Just risk losing it completely. But the Max Strike again, Santino really not caring
about
the
Rillaboom.
The Defiant boost, but yeah, into the Rillaboom. It is going to be a critical hit, and that's a lot of damage onto the Rillaboom.
to Venusaur's benefit. Sleep Powder into Thundurus this time around, if it connects, would be very useful right now. Groudon will have to take a Grassy Glide or possibly a Wood Hammer from this Rillaboom, depending on what Pokemon it targets and, you know, the speed of Rillaboom in general. But I think Groudon at full health is in a perfect position to try and do that. Emilio could also just switch the Rillaboom out here and say, you know, once Dynamax is over, Grassy Glide, depending on how your Groudon is trained, could be a one-hit knockout. If I get any chip damage onto that Groudon, that obviously increases those odds. And a second Intimidate here would not be a bad thing to have. So I really like this adjustment from Emilio. You know, 2 Fake Out users, 2 Pokemon that have abilities that are just really great against Santino's team. I think the big question here, though, is what did Santino do, and is Venusaur going to be taken off the field?
Yeah, just like that.
Yeah, just
Venusaur
like that.
is going to be removed. That Fake Out, stopping what Santino would have been able to do with that Venusaur, and the speed boost coming through once again. But Santino is still open to be able to use another max move, and it's the Max Rockfall. Thundurus is at basically full, and it's not going to be enough to secure the knockout, but it does bring that Thundurus pretty low.
A second Max Rockfall will most likely score that knockout. Alternatively, if Santino has the Shadow Rider Calyrex, now could be an interesting time to send that out. Yes, you do still have to worry about the grassy terrain and the Rillaboom throwing an attack into that spot, but if your Shadow Rider Calyrex is able to take that, that is one possibility. Instead, it's Grimmsnarl once again, so Santino really sticking to this formula. You know, Venusaur, Groudon, Grimmsnarl, and then probably the Calyrex once again. Grimmsnarl, I think a Trick Iron Ball here would be another interesting play, but we didn't see that quite pay off like I think Santino wanted in Game 2. You know, the fact that Iron Ball takes a whole turn to activate just meant that Thundurus was able to still go for an attack this turn relatively unpunished. And, you know, it's possible that with the Intimidate down on that Groudon, the Thundurus would be able to take a Max Quake even if it was grounded by that Iron Ball. But then you have to ask yourself, well, what else can this Grimmsnarl do? You know, Foul Play into a Defiant boosted Thundurus would certainly be valuable at this point in time, but
would it be able to even move?
Exactly.
Because the Defiant boost is definitely going to make that Grimmsnarl not enjoy being in front of that Thundurus. We've definitely seen that before. Grimmsnarl goes for the Scary Face into the Max Guard. And now the Max Quake, though, just going into the Incineroar. Big call out. Still going to be able to get the survival. That's 2 Intimidate drops onto this Groudon. But Special Defense also being boosted here, potentially expecting something like that Shadow Rider Calyrex to be in the back.
I think so. And I also think that Santino, the way he played that turn with the Scary Face onto the Thundurus without Groudon following up with the target, indicates to me that he's also running that Shadow Rider Calyrex in the back of his party, because yes, you're giving your opponent a Defiant boost, but you're also getting rid of those speed boosts. I believe it's at +2 right now, and as a result, your Shadow Rider Calyrex should outspeed Thundurus, definitely within knockout range from a Shadow Rider Calyrex Astral Barrage at this point. So Santino just thinking a couple turns ahead there, you know, thinking even if Thundurus gets another Defiant boost and somehow knocks out my Groudon or my Grimmsnarl, that's really the opportunity I'm looking for to get the Shadow Rider Calyrex on the field without taking damage and then immediately pick up that knockout in retaliation. So good forward thinking. Unfortunately for Santino, that Max Guard sort of calling him out. And now this Grimmsnarl in a spot where Fake Out plus an attack will knock it out before it's able to do really much of anything. So whether or not Groudon can take advantage of this is to be seen.
Yeah, Thundurus going for the Wild Charge. That Grimmsnarl is absolutely out of here. And so Thundurus is going to take a little bit of recoil damage.
Oh,
and
a
the
lot
Life
of
Orb.
it.
Yeah, the Life Orb damage on top of it as well will be enough to knock it out. He crashed, though, from this Groudon. It's not going to be doing very much into that Fire-type Incineroar, but Santino does have one more Pokemon in the back, and Emilio does have that Rillaboom as well as the Shadow Rider Calyrex. There it is.
So we'll have to pay attention to how these Shadow Rider Calyrex are trained, because we have not seen these two Pokemon face off yet in battle face-to-face like this. If Santino's Shadow Rider Calyrex is faster, that could mean that he's able to take a bit of an advantage. But looking at how these abilities are activated on the field, we saw Emilio's Shadow Rider Calyrex showcase the Unnerve and the Grim Neigh first, which means at least it could be a speed tie, but it's also just as likely that Emilio's Calyrex is faster. Only Santino knows the answer to that right now. You know, given that Santino's running substitute on that Shadow Rider Calyrex, it's possible that he's opted to be a bit slower, possibly bulkier. But just, you know, good things to keep an eye out for. We also saw Emilio prioritize the Will-O-Wisp in this position in a previous game. And I don't think you necessarily go for that here. You know, knowing that Rillaboom is your last Pokemon in the back, as long as you get some damage on the field to put these Pokemon within knockout range of a Grassy Glide, you're in a pretty strong winning condition.
Well, Santino is going to protect his own Shadow Rider Calyrex. Emilio goes for the Astral Barrage. Groudon taking that like a champ. Yeah, you know, max Quake boosts definitely helping out there, but feels like there might be something else with that as well, as Incineroar is going to get knocked out to the Precipice Blades. And so now Emilio does have that Rillaboom in the back. It's 2v2 here in this final game of this series between Emilio and Santino.
Grassy terrain still active on the field as well, which means this Groudon is
not safe. It just disappeared.
Yep.
Rillaboom's gonna reset that.
Yep. Still active, and Groudon is not going to like a Grassy Glide from this Rillaboom. And if you think about it, I feel like you forego the fake out in this situation and you just go for that Grassy Glide. If you are absolutely positive that your Shadow Rider Calyrex is faster at this point in time, you go for the Grassy Glide into that Groudon, hope for the best, and then you hope that your Astral Barrage will knock out. But instead, Emilio playing things safe with a fake out. And
Calyrex
outspeeding.
It does. Emilio does get the Astral Barrage off first. It's a one-hit knockout onto Santino's. Groudon doesn't get a chance to move, and that Grim Neigh boost as well going to be very beneficial to Emilio's game plan here in this game number 3. Sandstorm is off the field, but Grassy Terrain active. Shadow Rider Calyrex also activated. That Groudon's going down.
Yes, single target Astral Barrage with that special attack boost, plus a Grassy Glide from a Rillaboom in grassy terrain. That is going to be more than enough damage to pick up the knockout here. And Emilio locking in a top 4, if not better, finish here in New Jersey. What an incredibly well-played set. Really coming down to the wire with those two Shadow Calyrexes facing off. In the end, Emilio's was faster, and that's sometimes all you need to win.
Yeah, congratulations to Emilio, staying undefeated. Undefeated in Swiss rounds, taking this first top 8 match of Top Cut as well. But hats off to both of these players. I mean,